The wind howled through the towering buildings of Manhattan, sending an icy chill through the night. It was late and most of the city had retreated indoors, seeking warmth from the bitter cold. But not everyone had that luxury. Barron Trump walked down Fifth Avenue, his long strides purposeful but unhurried. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his designer coat, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. It had been a long day, filled with meetings and obligations he neither asked for nor particularly enjoyed. He had spent hours shaking hands with people who only saw his last name, not him. The suffocating weight of expectation pressed down on him constantly. But solitude, especially in the quiet of the city at night, was something he cherished. The sidewalks were nearly empty, save for the occasional car honking in the distance. The city never truly slept, but in moments like these, it almost felt like it did. That's when he saw him. The figure was huddled against the side of a brick building, wrapped in layers of tattered blankets, unmoving except for the occasional tremble. Barron slowed his pace. He had seen homeless people before, countless times in fact. New York City was filled with them. But something about this man made Barron stop in his tracks. Maybe it was the way he sat, motionless, hunched over as if he had lost all will to move. Maybe it was the quiet desperation in the way he clutched a torn jacket around himself, his face barely visible under a hood. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because, for the first time, Barron actually looked. He had been raised in a world of excess. Penthouse apartments, designer clothes, private security. People like him weren't supposed to think about those who lived outside the bubble of wealth. But the world outside had always fascinated him. His parents told him he was lucky, that he had been born into privilege, but Barron wasn't sure if luck was the right word. Because what about people like this man? Had he simply been unlucky? Barron's gaze drifted to a small cardboard sign beside the man, the words scrawled with shaky handwriting. I used to be someone. Something tightened in Barron's chest. For a long moment he just stood there watching. He didn't know what to say or if saying anything would even make a difference. Then the man coughed, a deep, ragged sound that seemed to shake his entire body. Barron took a step closer. Sir? His voice was quiet, hesitant. The man barely stirred. Barron knelt down, the cold pavement seeping through his pants. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Sir, are you okay? A pair of tired, bloodshot eyes finally lifted to meet his. The man blinked as if struggling to comprehend that someone was speaking to him. His face was gaunt, his skin weathered. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. For the first time in his life, Barron Trump felt helpless. And he hated it. This wasn't right. This wasn't how people were supposed to live. Barron reached into his coat pocket, fumbling for his wallet. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and extended it toward the man. Here, he said. Please take this. The man stared at the money. Then, to Barron's surprise, he shook his head. I don't need your pity, the man rasped. His voice was hoarse, cracked like old leather. I need a reason. Barron frowned. A reason? The man didn't answer. His gaze drifted back to the pavement, hollow and unfocused. Barron didn't know what to do. He could have walked away, convinced himself that he had done his part. But something inside him wouldn't let him. He wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not until he understood. Barron took a deep breath. Let me get you something warm to eat. The man hesitated, then let out a weak chuckle. Kid, you think a sandwich is gonna fix this? No, Barron admitted, but it's a start. He turned, scanning the block. A 24-hour diner was a few buildings down. He knew he could send a security detail, have them drop off food without getting involved himself. That's what his father or mother would do. But that didn't feel right. I'm getting you something, Barron said, standing up. Wait here. The man laughed again, shaking his head. Where am I gonna go? A few minutes later, Barron returned with a steaming container of soup, a sandwich, and a bottle of water. He crouched back down and handed them to the man. The man eyed the food warily. Why are you doing this? Barron thought for a moment. Because I want to. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, the man took the soup, wrapping his trembling fingers around it. Thanks, he muttered. Barron didn't leave. He watched as the man took a careful sip, then another. Something about the simple act of watching him eat made Barron feel something he couldn't quite name. You said you used to be someone, Barron said. Who were you? The man's grip on the soup tightened. For a moment, Barron thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, the man said, someone who never thought he'd end up here. Barron didn't press him. He could see it in the man's eyes. There was a story buried beneath the layers of dirt and despair, one that had been left untold for too long. And for the first time in his life, Barron realized that sometimes, helping someone wasn't about giving them money. It was about listening. The wind howled through the empty streets as Barron sat beside the homeless man, the freezing pavement seeping through his designer pants. The man sipped his soup, his fingers trembling from either the cold or exhaustion, maybe both. His eyes, hollow and bloodshot, stared at nothing in particular. "You never answered my question," Barron said, breaking the silence. "Who were you?" The man let out a dry, bitter chuckle. "That's a hell of a question, kid." Barron didn't push. He simply waited. He had learned early in life that sometimes silence made people speak more than questions ever could. The man let out a slow, shaky breath, his body slumping forward. "I was a husband," he said finally. "A father. I worked in finance, stocks, investments, that kind of thing. A regular guy in a suit walking through the city just like you are now. I had a house in Queens, a wife who loved me, and a daughter who thought I was some kind of superhero." His lips pressed into a tight line, and for a moment he seemed to get lost in the memory. "Then I made a mistake." Barron didn't move, didn't speak. He could feel the weight in the man's voice, the pain wedged between his words. "A stupid mistake," the man continued, his jaw tightening. "I got greedy. Thought I was smarter than everyone else. A client of mine, some hotshot real estate developer, came to me with an inside tip. Illegal, of course. But it was easy money. A sure thing. I told myself I'd do it once. Just once. I'd make enough to set my family up for life, then I'd never cross that line again." His fingers clenched around the soup container, his grip so tight it looked like it might crack. "But that's the thing about greed," he said, shaking his head. "Once it gets in, it doesn't leave. I took more risks. Started playing the market like it was a casino. And for a while I was winning. Big. My accounts were growing, my wife and daughter had everything they ever wanted. I felt invincible." He laughed, a low, humorless sound. Then came the crash. Barron felt his stomach tighten. He had heard about it on the news. The financial collapse that had sent thousands of people into ruin. "I lost everything overnight," the man whispered. "One minute I was rich, the next I was drowning. And when the SEC came knocking, I didn't even have time to fight back. They froze my assets, opened an investigation. My wife, God, she tried to stand by me, but what could she do? She woke up one morning to find our bank accounts empty, our house being seized. She left, took my daughter with her. Said she needed stability, that she couldn't live in my mess." His voice cracked, but he didn't cry. Maybe he had run out of tears long ago. "After that, I had nothing," he said. "No job, no home, no family. I tried. God knows I tried. But nobody hires a man with fraud charges hanging over his head. The friends I used to have? Gone. The people I used to help? Didn't even return my calls. And slowly the world just swallowed me up." Barron swallowed hard. "That was 5 years ago," the man finished, his voice barely above a whisper. 5 damn years. The street felt impossibly silent. Barron had expected tragedy, he had expected pain. But not this. Not a man who had once walked the same streets in a suit and tie, only to lose everything by his own hand. For the first time, Barron didn't know what to say. The man let out another bitter laugh. "Now you see. Now you get it?" He motioned to the street around him. "You think a bowl of soup is gonna fix this? A bed for the night?" Barron took a breath. "No," he admitted. "But you have to start somewhere." The man shook his head. "You don't get it, kid. People like me, we don't get another start. There's no second chance." Barron's expression hardened. "That's not true." The man scoffed. "Oh really? And what do you know about falling? About losing everything?" "I don't," Barron said honestly. "But I know what it's like to be judged before anyone even knows who you are. I know what it's like to feel trapped in a life you didn't ask for." The man studied him, his tired eyes narrowing slightly. Barron leaned forward. "I don't think you want to be here. I don't think you want to give up. You're still telling your story, aren't you? If you really thought it was over, you wouldn't be talking to me right now." The man was silent for a long time. Then he let out a breath. "You're a persistent little bastard, aren't you?" Barron smiled slightly. "I've been told that before." The man sighed. "What exactly are you offering, kid?" Barron stood up, brushing the dust off his pants. "A real chance. A place to stay. A fresh start." The man hesitated. "You trust me?" Barron asked. The man let out a breath. "I don't trust anyone." Barron nodded. "Then take a chance." After a long, painful silence, the man slowly pushed himself to his feet. He swayed slightly, as if his body had forgotten how to stand for too long. Barron reached out, steadying him without a word. The man looked at him. You got a name, kid? Barron, he said. Something flickered in the man's eyes, recognition maybe? But he didn't say anything. Instead he just sighed. All right, Barron. Lead the way. The elevator ride up was slow, but not as slow as the way the man moved once they stepped into the suite. He walked in like a stranger entering forbidden territory, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting someone to suddenly throw him out. Jesus, he muttered, running a hand through his unkempt hair. This place is bigger than my old apartment. Barron shrugged. It's just a hotel room. The man shook his head. Not to someone who's been sleeping on concrete. He sat down at the edge of the plush bed but didn't lean back. It was as if he still wasn't convinced he belonged there. Barron watched him for a moment before sitting in the chair across from him. You never told me your name, Barron said. The man exhaled, rubbing his temple. For a moment, Barron thought he might refuse to answer. Then finally he said, Vincent. Vincent Carter. Barron nodded. All right, Vincent. You've got a roof over your head tonight. That's a start. Vincent let out another humorless chuckle. A start to what? To getting back on your feet? Vincent leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He was quiet for a long time, his face unreadable. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, You don't get it, kid. I wasn't always this guy. Barron remained silent, waiting. Vincent took a breath. I already told you about the money. The greed. How I lost everything. But what I didn't tell you is that before all that, I had a plan. A dream. Barron tilted his head. What kind of dream? Vincent's lips twitched slightly as if the memory of it hurt. I wanted to be an artist, he said. Before Wall Street, before the suits and the briefcases, I used to paint. Big canvases, tiny details. I loved it. I lived for it. He shook his head, staring at the floor. But my father? He called it a waste of time. Said real men don't paint. Said the only color that mattered was green. Money. And I was young, stupid. I wanted his approval. So I traded in my paintbrushes for a damn stock portfolio. Barron frowned. You gave it up? Vincent nodded. Yeah. And at first I thought I made the right call. Money was rolling in. People respected me. But the thing is, I never felt anything. Not like I did when I was painting. He exhaled sharply. And when everything came crashing down, the worst part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that I had spent my whole damn life chasing something I never really wanted. A heavy silence filled the room. Barron didn't know what to say. He had spent his whole life surrounded by people chasing money, power, influence. But for the first time he was sitting across from someone who had caught it, only to watch it slip through his fingers. Vincent shook his head, letting out a breath. I used to tell myself I'd paint again. That I'd go back to it someday. But someday never came. He looked down at his hands. And now, these hands don't even feel like mine anymore. Barron leaned forward. Then pick up a brush. Vincent let out a sharp laugh, but there was no humor in it. It's not that simple, kid. Why not? Because I'm a washed-up ex-broker with a rap sheet and a reputation that's trashed. Because no one gives a damn about a homeless guy who used to dream about painting. Barron narrowed his eyes. I do. Vincent blinked, caught off guard. Barron stood up. You think this is it? That your story ends here? He gestured around the suite. You got a second chance, Vincent. Maybe you screwed up before. Maybe you made mistakes. But that doesn't mean you're finished. Vincent stared at him, his expression unreadable. Barron exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You want to paint? Paint. Stop waiting for it someday. Because someday doesn't come unless you make it. For the first time since they had met, Vincent looked shaken. Not by anger, not by exhaustion, by hope. Barron took out his phone. I'm sending someone over in the morning. They'll bring you clothes, food. Whatever you need. But you have to decide if you want to take the next step. Vincent swallowed hard. His fingers twitched like a man on the edge of something big. You really think I can come back from this? He asked quietly. Barron met his gaze. I think only you can answer that. A long silence stretched between them. Then, slowly Vincent nodded. All right, he said. Let's see if you're right. Barron smiled. Good. And for the first time, Vincent Carter, the man who had lost everything, finally had a reason to try again. The morning sunlight filtered through the large windows of the hotel suite, casting golden light onto the elegant furnishings. The city outside bustled with life, cars honking, people hurrying to work, but inside all was still. Vincent Carter stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hotel bathroom, staring at his reflection. The man looking back at him was unfamiliar. For the first time in years he was clean. His scruffy beard had been trimmed, his face no longer hidden beneath layers of grime. His hair was still a little messy, but it no longer clung to his forehead in tangled knots. He wore fresh clothes, a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, but to him they might as well have been designer. He ran a hand over his face, still adjusting to the feeling of being human again. A knock at the door snapped him out of his daze. "Vincent? You up?" It was Barron. Vincent opened the door to find the young man standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. He extended one. "Thought you might need this." Vincent hesitated before taking it. "You keep surprising me, kid." Barron smirked. "I get that a lot." Vincent sat down on the couch, taking a cautious sip of the hot coffee. His hands still trembled, but not from the cold this time. It was something else, something unfamiliar. "Oh, how do you feel?" Barron asked, sitting across from him. Vincent let out a breath. "Like I'm waiting for someone to wake me up and tell me this was all a dream." He gestured around the suite. "I haven't been inside a place this nice in years. I keep expecting security to come and throw me out." Barron shook his head. "No one's throwing you out, Vincent." Vincent studied him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" Barron leaned back, considering the question. "Because I can," he said simply. "Because too many people look the other way when they see someone struggling. And because, I don't know, maybe I was supposed to find you that night." Vincent chuckled. "You believe in fate, Trump?" "I don't know," Barron admitted. "But I do believe that we don't meet people by accident." Vincent nodded slowly, as if letting the words settle. He took another sip of coffee before setting the cup down. "So what now?" Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stack of papers. He slid them across the table. Vincent picked them up, frowning. "What's this?" "A house," Barron said. Vincent blinked. "Come again?" "A house," Barron repeated. "It's not a mansion or anything crazy. But it's yours. A small place in Queens, fully paid for. You won't have to worry about rent, and there's no catch." Vincent stared at him, his hands tightening around the papers. This is a joke, right?" Barron shook his head. "I had my people find a place for you. It's close to the city, so if you want to start over, you can. No strings attached." Vincent let out a shaky breath. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Barron said. Vincent swallowed hard. His eyes darted between Barron and the papers, disbelief written all over his face. "No one's ever done something like this for me," he whispered. Barron leaned forward. "Then maybe it's time someone did." For a long time Vincent didn't speak. He just stared at the papers, his hands trembling. And then, before Barron could react, Vincent let out a choked laugh, one that quickly turned into something else. Tears. Silent, broken tears slid down his face. He turned away, rubbing a hand over his eyes, his breathing uneven. "God, I don't even know how to say thank you." "You don't have to," Barron said quietly. Vincent shook his head. "No, I do. Because no one ever gave me a second chance before. And if you hadn't stopped that night?" He exhaled sharply, gripping the papers like they were the most precious thing in the world. "I don't think I'd be here much longer." Barron didn't reply. He didn't need to. Vincent wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. "You really think I can start over?" "I know you can," Barron said. "You just have to believe it too." Vincent nodded, his grip tightening on the documents. A new beginning. A real chance. And for the first time in years, Vincent Carter felt like someone again.